I think we'll start. Thank you very much, everyone, for waiting. Welcome to this really important discussion about how and why women human rights defenders and feminist movements in the MENA region are using online spaces to do advocacy, to reach out to their communities, to advocate for social justice and women's rights and equality. And the kinds of online violence and harassment they're facing as a result, not only from governments, but also from ordinary citizens. We want to explore what's happening in the broader MENA region, but with a particular focus on Iran, Lebanon, Tunisia, and also Syria, to see what these women human rights defenders are doing, how they're tackling these issues, and what some of their strategies are for countering this online violence. Ultimately, we want to also ask our speakers to give us their ideas on what social media platforms, as well as the international community, can do to support them and make sure that their presence, their critical presence in online spaces, is safe and far from violence, free from violence, far from violence, both of them. Because, you know, online spaces have become a critical a place for advocacy on behalf of human rights, and especially women's rights, LGBT rights, as the civic space in the region closes down. We also have one of our own team members speaking about the results of a recent consultation that we had with a larger group of activists from the MENA region about this very same issue. So we're very happy to be hosting this event, and we're very pleased that you can join us. We have an incredible group of speakers. We're especially happy to be hosting them. They're young activists working in their contexts or on their, particular countries, doing very innovative work on gender issues. I'm going to introduce them. Their bios are on the CSW, on the WHRD platform, so please go and take a look at their longer bios. I'm going to just introduce them very shortly so that we can move on to our discussion, which is a really important discussion. So today we're really happy to have Julia Jamal with us. She is a member of the Syrian Feminist Lobby, she's an international gender and Syria expert with more than 13 years working with local Syrian organizations, CBOs, and activists with a special emphasis on gender, youth, and conflict transformation. She's proven experience in providing technical rigor to all gender and conflict-based programming. She has worked with local, international organizations, nationally and regionally, and she has extensive consultancy experience, including on various studies and as mediator, facilitator, and trainer. We're very happy to have you with us today, Julia. Talking about Syria, the situation in Syria. And I'm going to introduce all the speakers, and then I'll go to the questions, if that's okay. The next person I want to introduce, and I'm actually introducing everybody in order how I'm going to ask them questions, so you'll have an idea. The next person is Azim Mohajerin. She's a veteran human rights advocate, and she's worked with the Center for Human Rights in Iran, Human Rights Watch, and Women for Afghan Women on the situation of human rights in Iran, and especially women's rights. She has over 5 years experience and expertise working on marginalized groups in Iran and also on gender equality. We also have Giwa Nasr, who is a political, environmental, feminist activist and a program officer at Femena in Lebanon. Giwa has studied English literature at the Lebanese University, worked in the peace building and conflict resolution sector for a few years. She's passionate about the intersectionality between feminism, peace building, climate, and economic justice. And she holds a strong belief that women are the change makers in the MENA region. We also agree with you, Giwa. We think that women are the change makers. Giwa is also an active trainer on different topics, among which are gender-based violence, sexual rights, and cybersecurity and environmental feminism. We also have Sarah Medini from Asfat Nissa from Tunisia. Sarah Medini is a political analyst at Aswat Nisa and responsible for the hearing and guidance cell for women victims of violence. She graduated from the Faculty of Legal, Political, and Social Sciences in Tunisia, and her legal training enabled her, on the one hand, to analyze and comment on public policies and political and legal events in Tunisia, and on the other hand, to direct legal aid to women victims of violence. We're very happy to have you with us, Sarah, and very happy that Aswat Nisa is part of this discussion, but also part of our discussion at the regional level. And then lastly, we have Lama, who is a medical doctor by training, but she's also a peace builder and a women human rights defender. She works at Femena as the regional advocacy coordinator, but before that, she was also the co-founder of Peacemakers, the first registered peace organization in Syria. Prior to that, she served as a program manager for many peace and security programs in the MENA region, focusing on youth, leadership, gender issues, and human rights advocacy. Lama has over 14 years of experience in the peace building and development sector and is a member of many well-known networks. Lama holds a medical degree from Syria, an MSc in project management from the University of Sussex in the UK, and most recently, she was the Rotary Peace Fellow from a university in Thailand. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us for this really important and critical discussion. So I'm going to now turn to my question to Julia, who's going to respond. Julia, so please tell us, how have Syrian women been using online spaces to organize and coordinate among themselves, especially given that Syria has been embroiled in conflict for the last 10 years, and they have to work across borders in order to communicate and coordinate with one another?
شكرا سوزان، شكرا جميعا.
Thank you, Suzanne. Allow me first to start by exposing the situation and what led us to use more and more the internet or the social space, because given that the internet has entered is in all the spaces of life, and given the oppression and the violence, we had to find a space to communicate, and then we found that the online is the way. And even if the life circumstances were different, however, the internet was a common tool, and we were able to work on different levels, and we were able to achieve several objectives through the internet. For example, the activist women became the voices of women online, and they continued coordinating. And there were a lot of pages of women activists, and the feminist organizations for whom those who were not able really to express themselves in a normal way. So they expressed themselves on the internet. However, they were also we were able to provide this safe space for them, and at the same time, the women inside Syria were also able to access the internet through their participation in conferences and international consultations or meetings on the internet, because that was not possible in the past. So the participation was only limited to those people who were able to receive visas, to get a visa, and to travel to those countries and participate in these conferences abroad. So the online allowed the women to raise their voices and express themselves from Syria. In addition, we were able to launch awareness campaigns and advocacy campaigns for issues that we worked on. We were also able to develop tools on the platforms, which in turn provided more access to those groups, and also to better coordination among these groups, whether inside the different Syrian regions that are under different authorities. For example, the feminist Syrian lobby launched a campaign 3 years ago, which is still on, and the follow-up And as for the follow-up work that we did, we were able to know that we were able to reach thousands of followers and to spread the information and the publications that were put on the internet. So all this wouldn't have been possible in physical meetings. And what is sure is that we're not saying that internet or online spaces are an alternative to physical meetings. However, they are an added value to our political uh, and social space. And that is why these tools should be used in order to serve our objectives. In addition, the online space was also a space for communication, especially for sensitive issues that are not possible to follow. For example, the dossier or file of the victims of disappearance and kidnapping, and we were able also to coordinate through the platforms which facilitated our communication, archiving, documentation, and advocacy for victims of disappeared and involuntary disappeared. In addition, the online space allowed us also to give trainings online, and this also helped launch platforms, educational platforms online, and also produce a larger knowledge content, which allowed us to reach a larger community. And we also produced special educational programs on the internet. For example, when we had trainings that were given in the place, we had to modify them so we could provide them online. And this also allowed us to reach a larger number of participants. However, the online tools or platforms has its setbacks. For example, some women do not have access to the internet, and especially those women who are in camps. And the through the online communication, especially that we were living in a protracted war that lasted for more than 12 years, the objective media lagged in Syria, and the female activists, and through the online space, were able to provide alternative through programs and podcasts. And in the past years, we were able to develop these tools, and we were able also to host the academia members and activists who gave online trainings and the programs. I don't want to take from the time of my colleagues, and now I'm talking about the advantages or how we can use the online space with all the violence that is also carried or present in this online space. But the use of online space is active and effective among the female activists in Syria, and at the same time it provides a safe and free space that is better than the usual activities carried on the ground. And in most of the times, the Syrian government or the Syrian regime um, was was not able to close a blind eye on the work we did. For example, last year in 2020, Ayat Rifai was killed by her husband, and because of the pressure on the internet, this issue raised again the issue of domestic violence. And so this really mobilized the women not only from outside Syria but also inside Syria, and this led the government work on a law, on issuing a law against domestic violence, and by this, the Syrian women activists were able to really recognize their capacities and potential in terms of advocacy and lobbying and asking for new laws to be issued by the parliament.
Thank you so much, Julia, for that very interesting response. It seems that, Syria and Iran have, even though their contexts are different, but they have very much in common in terms of how they're using online spaces to communicate, between the diaspora community, which is large for Iranians as well, and also for Syrians. So I'm going to turn to Azin, who works at an organization by the name of MENA. And MENA is a big part of what MENA does is actually works on internet access and digital security. So my question to you, Azin, is this. Women have been using online spaces in Iran as a primary mode of communication and for organizing for some time because the civic space is so limited. What are they doing online, and how has the state been responding?
Thanks, Femena, for having me. So as you mentioned, because of the separation of the states, many of the women rights activists, particularly women rights activists, has forced to leave the physical space and move to the social media space. During the past years, we've seen many awareness raising campaigns for child rights, for reproductive rights, for the equal and workspace or safe workspace rights that led by the women rights activists on the social media. However, unsurprisingly, Iranian government did not tolerate it, even that online activity, and suppress those online activity as well too. We've been seeing the management of the those online social media have been called or summoned. Some of them have even got the real life consequences for the online activities, such as sentences to the prison to the for years of the prisons. In addition to that, we've been seeing increasing of the online social media attacks on the women rights activists, particularly women rights activists in Iran. Last May, many of the women rights activists who were holding the social media accounts, they were experiencing the massive attack on their accounts. In addition to that, they have been online harassment to the women rights activists through the hate speech, threaten their life and violence. And that led some of these harassment, particularly for fake accounts, which many times comes from the anonymous account or fake account, which is a pattern that government in Iran has been used. They even sometimes they forced to leave the space because the space getting very brutal or getting very violent for so many of these women activists. I also in the recent uprising of the Mahsa Amini, social media and social media platforms really play a crucial role for these protests. As at the beginning, like the picture of the Mahsa Amini was widely spread on the social media account, which made us such a unique solidarity between the Iranians. And the government, the response to that, the government immediately shut down and throttling internet and also blocked many social media accounts, like for example, Instagram, which was blocked after these protests. And the women rights activists for these protests and activists in general, they were using the social media to for the ways of the communicate with each other and the reason that it was blocked is the government wanted to prevent any arrangement or any block the communication between the activists, either inside the country between each other or even between the diaspora and inside the country activists. And so we've been seeing the increasing of the suppressions even on the online platform, even after this after these protests, we've seen since many of the activists, including women rights defenders, were getting sentenced to the prison because of their online activities, and the attacking of their account and the harassment, the speech is also has been continued. It hasn't been stopped.
Thank you very much, Azine, for that explanation. I think it's really helpful for people to get a sense of, how women human rights defenders and women in general are using online spaces in Iran, and the range of consequences. But also, I'm amazed by both Syria and Iran and how people can coordinate and mobilize support for their causes in online spaces, especially when it comes to gender issues and gender-based violence. So, Ghiwa, you work at Femena, which is a leading organization in Lebanon. Tell us what kinds of violence women, and I just want to make sure that the interpreters can actually hear me. I'm on the English channel, so maybe I should go on the original channel just to make sure. Please, so Ghiwa, please tell us what kinds of violence do women human rights defenders face in Lebanon as a result of their organizing, and who, is the cause of that violence? Is the violence patriarchal by nature, or is it organized and perpetuated by political groups? Do some issues, such as that challenge traditional beliefs, result in more gender-based violence against women, such as LGBTQI issues? Do those sensitive topics attract more violence?
أولاً شكراً كثير فمنا على
First, we would like to thank Femena for inviting us to this meeting. First, what I would like to highlight at the beginning is that there were two types of parallel violence against women, especially the feminist activists, during the 17th of October uprisal, but we were not able really to make the difference between the patriarchal violence or the politically organized violence. But I believe that the lack of this idea, or the presence, the absence of women activists at the time. I don't know if you were following the events, that at the time the revolution in Lebanon was described as a feminist revolution because of the presence of women who took the streets. And that was really bothering to the political class, and also for those individuals who were not used to the presence of women in public spaces and also in decision-making spaces, and the activities that took place in the capital and in the regions around Lebanon. If my description is precise or accurate, so the women feminists were faced with two types of violence: the political violence that focused on their ideas and the principles and demands, and also that type of violence that focused on the gender, and most of the time it targets their honor and their societies, and it was a gender-based violence. And even in the ranks of the demonstrators. As for the types of violence that were exercised on us during the uprisal, in fact, there were new types of new ways to hack our computers and even cell phones, and even the female journalists who were covering the movement. And some journalists or some feminists had their phones stolen, and and their accounts were hacked, or their social account, social media accounts were hacked, and sometimes some activists profiles were used, and a lot of news were posted on their sites. And as for the stalking that took place, even the feminists who were on the ground were a victim of stalking. And as you may know, the public opinion was divided between supporters and opponents of the system. So some people were. There was then a certain direct opposition between the direct activists and especially the feminists, because as I've mentioned, there was a real feminist activity and movement during that time. And also, the hate speech was addressed against women and focused on their presence in the spaces, in the public spaces and civic spaces, because, as you know, in our societies, women are not supposed to be in the political sphere and in the civic sphere. And we should not have really opinion in this field. And usually politicians in Lebanon who have been there since the beginning did not allow women to participate in power, which really impacted us and influenced us, especially that there was a real patriarchal view towards us, and some women were victim of smear and blackmailing, and uh, and even their person, were directly attacked, and especially when their photos were put on Instagram, especially that they participated in the activities. And in some groups, we created some groups to invite activists to take part in these activities, because as you may know, in Syria and Iran, usually we coordinate through WhatsApp groups in order to gather, and usually this is done over the phone or WhatsApp groups or signal groups. And uh, and unfortunately, some participants were not used to send some articles that were triggering some, or that were threatening to us. And unfortunately, one of the form of digital violence used against women was, for example, having or asking activists to help in posting some job opportunities, for example. But all these were fake campaigns and fake marketing campaigns, just used to blackmail those women later on. So these were the most common forms of activities during the Lebanese upheaval.
Thank you so much for that explanation. It's always, I mean, I was lucky enough to be in Lebanon right before the coronavirus outbreak. So got to meet a lot of activists who participated, a lot of women human rights defenders, a lot of feminists who participated in your protest movement and your revolution in Lebanon. And it's always shocking to see the level of violence targeted, directed towards women who are asking to be recognized and to be given, fair opportunities, especially in places where you don't expect it so much, like Lebanon, where you would think that there would be greater acceptance of women's equality. So yeah, thank you very much for that explanation. I'm going to turn to Sarah now. Sarah, we're very happy to have you with us. I think all of us have watched the Tunisian experience over the years as one of the main sort of a model example of what the rest of the region could look like. And we're very sorry to see that in recent months or the last couple of years that the civic space has been shutting down rather quickly in Tunisia. And, as the space has been closing, women human rights defenders, feminists are using the online spaces even more like the rest of the region to organize and to get their messages out. What does that look like? How are they using these spaces, and what's the backlash that they're experiencing in Tunisia as a result of their online activism?
عسلامة وشكرا على الدعوة مرة أخرى. Good morning and thank you again for the invitation. The digital space in Tunisia has played a very important role in moving the society even before the revolution, before 12/11. It had played a role in revealing the truth of the situation, especially the political situation in Tunisia. And the role, of course, of this digital space has increased after the revolution because it has become more available for activism and for dialogue, and it is a space that is available for all the people. For example, we in Aswat Nisa organization, since we have started in 2011, we relied a lot on the digital space. And maybe the good example that could be given is the campaign that we were able to follow through Facebook in specific. That is why we are thankful that we have this digital space or virtual space for all the people around the world to see what is taking place in Tunisia, especially when it comes to the harassment case in which an MP was accused. And of course, through the social media, the victim was able to make her voice heard, and she was able to receive assistance. And the campaign that we launched was able to reach all the countries, and the victims were able also to receive psychosocial support they needed. So, but unfortunately, as Suzanne has just said, we were seeing more spaces, virtual and the civic spaces being banned lately, and we are seeing campaigns, systematic campaigns against the activists, especially in the digital space and more specifically in Facebook. For instance, we were last summer, or we had the last summer, the referendum on the new constitution in Tunisia. And in Aswat Nisa, or Women Voices, we wanted to explain the content of the constitution. And we have done this on Facebook in order for all the people to understand the constitution very well. So the aim behind that was to simplify the legal concepts for those who wanted to or who will be voting later on. But unfortunately, when we were preparing the videos, or when we posted the videos, we faced a lot of violence. So they told us, how do you dare participate in the political arena? Your place is in the house. So we have heard all these stereotypical speeches, and this also have led to digital and physical violence against all those who are in the videos. So they were receiving a lot of violent expressions. And what we have noticed is that in Tunisia, any woman who appears through the social media to give her opinion, whether she was with or against the regime, will always be described with bad words. There are women activists who are also threatened by being raped or killed, etc. And we have documented this in our organization, and we have also raised a case even if it was a symbolic way in order to face this phenomenon that is really dangerous. So it is true that in Tunisia we have a law, uh, Law 58 over 2017, uh, but this law does not identify the digital violence. In this case, that is why the violence online is not determined by using violent expressions or any other way of violence. That is why there's a need to clarify this more. And what is even more dangerous is that another decree was issued in Tunisia lately, and the title maybe makes us think that the digital space will be protected and safer, while the content shows that it will limit this digital space more and more for the women activists. And we have people who commented on this decree lately, and they were, of course, attacked again violently through the media because they talked about the content of the decree. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Yes, it's very distressing to see what's happening in Tunisia. And we just heard recently about Bushra Belhaj, who's a very well-known lawyer in Tunisia, who was charged with terrorism charges and sentenced to prison. So I just wanted to mention that because I followed her for some time, and but I'm very happy that a new generation of activists are so busy like yourself in Tunisia and really challenging some of this closure of civic space. Lama, I'm going to turn to you now. We did a consultation in Femena with the number, including pretty much everybody here today, but with a number of other women human rights defenders from the region who talked about these very same issues. And we talked about how women human rights defenders are organizing, online, and the types of violence they face. Was there anything in particular that emerged from those discussions that struck you, that was important, that perhaps it wasn't stressed during the presentations that we just heard, or that maybe you want to re-emphasize?
Well, yeah, thank you. Thank you, Suzanne, for letting me speak. And I would like to thank all of the speakers for sharing their tremendous experiences from the countries. Well, actually, I want to emphasize some of the points because I think they are like highly important. Well, according to the consultations that we have been doing, and as a result of our commitment to this very important topic, I can present some of the findings like into three main categories. The first one is the benefit, because Julia and other speakers spoke about the benefits of the use of the online spaces. So because of the online spaces, women human rights defenders were able to communicate in Syria and Lebanon, Tunisia, and also in Iran, and also express their opinions and raise their voices about their own issues. And they were able to show solidarity to each other, which was also great during the situations where violence was rapidly increasing. And also, social media platforms have been the cheapest and easiest tools to use for groups and movements. So because of that, this communication, and especially in countries where many had to flee, because of the conflict, or activists who are living in the diaspora, so because they cannot be present inside their own countries, so it's a great opportunity for them to keep the connection with citizens and other women human rights defenders inside their countries. I want also to emphasize how women human rights defenders rely on social media and the internet in general to conduct convenings such as this session at the CSW, to conduct workshops and coordinate meeting and training, which help exchange the knowledge and exchange the learning between one another. And during COVID-19 and other disasters, actually women human rights defenders were able to rely more on the internet in order not to lose their own audience or access, and actually increase the targeted group. And it also enabled women human rights defenders and activists to have incredible discussions about the women issues, and about things like, for example, sexual harassment, about violence, about also some critical questions like, for example, in our communities or in the MENA region, do fathers have power over their daughters, for example, to let them marry whoever they want? Like, these kind of debates on social media were very crucial because it made people think, and people, and specifically women, were able to change their own mindsets because they discovered that they are not alone in the face of these kind of structures. And I'm going to emphasize also the context where civic spaces are massively shrinking right now against feminist organizations and civic work, where security forces do not allow, for example, organizations to take funds or do projects. So activists and defenders cannot conduct meetings. So in this situation, social media and can be the best alternatives to do their own kind of work. So these online spaces have created the critical opportunities for more discussions about more sensitive topics or more issues about, like, for example, like accountability, about accountability within the women's movement itself and within the human rights defender field, where feminists started to also speak openly and loudly about the harassment they face, the abuse of power and abuse of financial resources within their organizations and movements. And also these spaces also created the space for survivors of violence to speak and share experiences and encourage others to also speak loudly about their experiences and about specific topics like FGM, about child marriage, sexual harassment, and other things. And I want also to speak a little bit about the problems or threats. And I know many of the speakers have spoken a lot about this, and especially about the targeting, where women human rights defenders can become well known and targeted by specific malware designed by security agents or governments to access their own information. And the targeting can also happen by ordinary people, because they just did not like something women human rights defenders have posted online about a particular issue. So many women human rights defenders during the last 10 years have experienced massive targeting attacks, commenting on their accounts to attack their own ideas for several reasons, pretending that women human rights defenders have international agendas or funded by external organizations, or that they are spreading unethical ideas. And unfortunately, some activists can get killing threats because of such attacks, and some can really get killed because of that. The online spaces have also a huge space for hatred speech and for the patriarchal ideas, where women human rights defenders have to work hard in order to challenge them. And they face tremendous attacks and sarcastic comments just because they are women, and they as women dare to speak about public issues. And for example, the constitution itself, where men are only considered eligible to speak about these topics. So in these patriarchal societies, some topics are still considered unacceptable, such as freedom, sexual identity, and the right of people to choose their identity, and the LGBTQ community rights. So women human rights defenders are actually being also attacked violently on these social media platforms because of that. And unfortunately, these spaces exclude a certain group of women, because some women don't have access to the internet or to social media platforms. So maybe because they don't have the access, or they don't have the skills or competencies or the financial resources. But at the grassroots level, many people still do not have the access to the internet. And even if they do not know how to use Instagram and Facebook and other platforms, which shrinks again the audience reach to random users sometimes, and not the women human rights defenders exact audience or beneficiaries. So it's true that social media platforms have empowered women human rights defenders in having the space to speak and communicate, but it also violates their personal freedom of expression in order to suppress them and control or punish them by laws, policies, and discriminatory practices. So the use of online spaces have also allowed attackers to target the reputation of women human rights defenders, where many of them have faced smear attacks, and many people have been like slamming their own images and lives. I want also to speak about the role of law and regulation regarding the use of online spaces by women human rights defenders, because many countries, like many countries, more, I think maybe 130 countries across the world have laws related to electronic crimes, including 13 Arab countries, and most of the time the crimes were discussed or presented not to preserve the freedom of expression, but to use as tools for dictatorships and regimes to attack women human rights defenders. And speaking about the MENA region, many women human rights defenders are mostly not living in democratic regimes, so these laws are not used to attack. So these laws are actually are used to attack the activists and arrest them. And I'm going to also speak about one of the law that social media has, which is providing an ID whenever you want to register for a new account. So this is something that can be difficult for and even risky for many women, because women are not able to give to give their personal identity all the time. So another law also which allows discrimination against specific topics or issues, like when women human rights defenders or even anyone write about Palestine or Syria, they usually get kicked out of the page because of what they are writing. And on the other hand, these spaces sometimes do not give enough space for the freedom of expression. So to say also, to speak about the sexual harassment the cyber violence itself, or sexual harassment online, there is no certain mechanism for making a complaint when women human rights defenders face that. And even if there is no protection mechanism. So women prefer to stay silent because they are afraid of being stigmatized, and also being under more pressures from the security forces, for example, or the community itself. And I also want to emphasize that one of the most common problems that human rights defenders face on the internet, on the online space, is the hate speech. So speaking from the perspective of the law or regulation, well, we know that the English algorithms work fine in detecting such speeches in the comments and posts, but it's not available precisely in Arabic. So we need to advocate for example, for Meta and other corporations to put more effort to create a better understanding of Arabic in order to detect hate speech. So women human rights defenders don't have to go through a lot in order, for example, to report a simple comment. So I want to say also that in some countries, according to the electronic crime law, anything that women human rights defenders write on social media may make them subjected to imprisonment. We saw that in Egypt and many other countries. And also this is used by the government or by groups attached to the government, which makes the use of these online spaces actually very problematic.
Thank you so much, Lama, for summarizing a lot of the very valuable discussions that we had in our group consultation. I'm glad that you mentioned the law, because I'm also going to ask Julia to comment on that. But, Julia, how is the state responding in Syria to online activism, and what, as activists based in the diaspora, what are you doing to ensure that you have safe communications with your counterparts inside the country, especially in regime-controlled areas? And can laws help in a case like Syria? Can they help?
Thank you, Susan. بجواب مختصر إذا القوانين
I will give you a brief answer. If the laws help, yes, I can say yes. But before we say yes, it is important to explain. And I would like to thank Lama for speaking a little bit about the laws. It is very important to see how the laws, the international laws or the national and local laws are dealing with cyber crimes. There's no international law that stipulates clearly the criminalization of cyber violence against women until now. We have some agreements And most of the time, they rely on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights or the CEDAW. But of course, they do not stipulate specifically anything related to cyber violence. There is the Budapest Agreement that was signed in 2001 and 2003. The additional protocol was issued, and 2021 an additional protocol 2 was also issued, but none of these conventions, agreements, or protocols under the European Council include anything that criminalizes the violence against women clearly. As to the Arab countries or the national laws, as Lama mentioned, 132 countries around the world have national laws, cybercrime laws in specific, and among them are 13 Arab countries. And of course, Syria is among these 13 Arab countries. We have to review the context for these crimes. The first crime was issued in 2012, less than a year after the beginning of the revolution, and this law was issued under cybercrime, then the Assad regime also issued another law in 2022 through a decree called cybercrime decree. So it is complementary to the first law. So the first law, as I said, was issued in 2012, and the second was issued in a time where we saw more mockery against the government and because of the situation, the deteriorating situation in Syria. So that was not to protect the civilians as much as it was a tool or a means used by most of the dictatorships to silence the opponents and put an end to freedom of expression. And this, of course, was a new means controlled by the Syrian regime to attack the activists, whether they published anything and they consider as opposing this law. And that was a way to maybe criminalize and imprison these people and put an end to freedom of expression. So the situation requires an international law. And I think that this international law, and I will try to be brief here, but I reiterate, an international law is important. National laws are important if the countries are signatories of international agreements or conventions that are directly linked to cybercrime, violence against women. If I go back to the first part of the question, how do the activists in diaspora make sure that they are communicating safely with their counterpartners inside? First of all, we have to be more aware of cyber safety and how to use the protection means. First of all, we used to use a program that we thought it was coded, but then later on we found out that this is not protected at all. And I'm speaking here about Telegram, that can easily receive or take information from your phone and publish it on the platform. So this is also a very important thing. Second, they do not take into account the cost of these programs. The women working on the ground do not understand that safe systems have to be paid for and not for free. And that is why they do not take into account when they plan their budgets or when they plan for any projects. And I'm giving you this as an example. So the challenges are numerous, and the danger is, of course, bigger in the zones where or inside the countries where the dictatorships are controlling. But since cybercrime is something that is of course, not limited to one country. Inside Syria, embezzlement and cyber violence was committed against activists, and there was hatred speech against them, and even threatening to be killed. And in most cases, these people were not held responsible. They were not held accountable because that was being done from outside Syria, from Europe, and this makes accountability more difficult because in general and based on what Asqua says, women usually face problems or challenges in access to judicial procedures. And if they have access to these courts, there is a difficulty in being able to receive this judicial assistance. So we are speaking here about the impossibility of receiving judicial assistance and impossibility of raising complaints. And Lama has mentioned the social stigma and traditions, etc. So the thing has to be done at different levels and in parallel. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia, for that really informative response. Really, I think we have to figure out how to hold people, not only individuals, but also governments accountable for the violation of violations against women in online spaces. And this is new territory. So it's really, I think it's an important, very important discussion, especially in this region. I think, of course, women face violence and online violence everywhere, but this region complicates. It's very complicated because it's not, as you mentioned, and as Lama mentioned, this is not a democratic, largely not a democratic region. So it creates complications. When we need better protection mechanisms. That will be our last question, but I'm going to turn to Azin now. And Azin, so the Iranian state has long been proposing to turn Iran's internet into an intranet. We saw the shutdown of the internet during the recent protests and in past protests as well, which allowed for increased use of violence by the state against protesters with little reporting or little ability to report on that violence. What is going on with the internet and regulations that block social media platforms in the country, and how can we help to make sure Iranians continue to have access to the internet and be connected internationally?
Yeah, so as we're talking about the laws, I remember Iran is not a member of the CEDAW, neither the long-lasting bill on the right now in the bill about the protection for violence against women has ever passed, so it's dusting on the parliament. So we have way less protection if we have any, and women's rights women has been advocating their rights in the social media. One of the ways that the way that they can go and file the complaint and combat all this violence that's is against them on the online platform, one of the ways is the social media companies and such as MENA, Instagram, Telegram, and etc. And one of the ways that these social media companies and international community in general can help the women is updating their policy, is being communicated, being engaged with the civil society. And as Lama mentions, many of them have the complaint mechanism in English, but there is a lack of mechanism in Farsi and Arabic. So it's very little when these women will go and file a complaint against the online harassment. Recently, we saw another case which government using a trademark on behalf of the activists and go to these companies to close the activist account. This is something that it is clearly shows the gap between the companies and the civil society. In order to people still getting access to the internet, to getting online, to bring them to the social media, internet is but to have them in the social media is very important that they updated their policy, they come in the engagement with the civil society. On the internet part, like on the shutdown and throttling, there have been some steps from the international community to help Iranian people to have access more to the internet. At the beginning of the protest, we saw the general license D2 that has been it was helping to get more, bring more Iranian having access to the different platforms, which is sanctions, but also having the access, having the enough resources to make sure that Iranian can access to the VPN so they can get online.
Thank you so much, Azin, for that very concise explanation of, I know, what is actually a lot of work that's gone into that. I'm glad that there's, you know, broad awareness among the international community about what's happening in Iran and how Iranians are slowly and very rapidly losing their access to online spaces, and for a number of reasons. It's not, you know, majority of which is, you know, the state's attempt to prevent communication. So I'm going to now turn to Sarah. Sarah, how have women been resisting online backlash in Tunisia? And what's the role of the law in criminalizing and limiting the work of women human rights defenders online? How is that, you know, how has that worked?
مع الأسف في تونس ما نجموش.
Unfortunately, in Tunisia, we cannot talk about a law that protects women, human rights defender from criminal crimes, because I've already said that in Tunisia, the only law that is available, that is the law to end violence against women, that is law 58, does not mention this type of violence. It only criminalizes verbal violence and physical, sexual, political, and economic violence. However, it does not mention the digital violence. And we, as women and feminists from civil society, we demanded, or we requested, the modification of this law to include the digital violence, because based on our experience as women victims of violence and in other organizations, we believe that the online violence is among the first form of violence against women and girls, but unfortunately our request is still not answered, and we are still in face of this blockage, that is a legal impasse that is facing us as women, and we are still requesting the modification of law 58 so that it includes the online crimes. And we are still waiting today for, and yesterday we had a new parliament in Tunisia, and we hope that this request be answered and be placed on the agenda. But we don't really have high hopes, and but we hope that this new parliament reviews this law. On the other hand, and as I've said, there is a will today in Tunisia on behalf of the authority to stifle the demonstrators and limit the freedom of expression, and especially on the online, through a new law, that is Decree 55, through Decree 55, to to um, to put an end to all opinions that oppose the public opinion, and to stop the comments on Facebook, or and even the statutes or the status on Facebook, and those young people were charged with crimes, and we really condemned, we as civil society, we condemned these decisions taken by the court to criminalize such posts. on Facebook and on the social media, and we as civil society in our different forms and types, we were against these decisions. However, no organization supported this decree. On the contrary, there were statements issued to defend the persons who were criminalized and who were taken to court by virtue of this law, and because the judgments or the decisions and sometimes these people were imprisoned. However, um, the decisions were opposed, and in addition, there was also a will to modify the work of the civil society organization, and this will make the um, the civil society in Tunis more willing and ready to defend their rights and their work.
Thank you so much, Sarah. What's happening in Tunisia is really very, very concerning to all of us. I think I speak on behalf of everyone because we've long looked at Tunisia as the model for the region, what could be possible, what could emerge from a dictatorship. And so what we see this sliding back, it's extremely concerning. Please keep us informed of what's going on. We would like to show solidarity for your actions. So whatever you do, especially on this issue, let us know. And I'm sure that other organizations present here will join us in acts of solidarity and trying to amplify the voices and what's happening inside of Tunisia. But I think really the work that you're doing is incredibly valuable, and we look forward to working with you to help bring attention, spotlight that work and what's happening. I'm going to now turn to Qiwa. You've been working a lot on this issue in your context, in your organization. You talked a little bit about when women organized, in the backlash that they experienced as a result of their participation in the revolution, and they organized. Tell us a little bit about when they organized a coordinated response to the online violence they were facing. Which, as you mentioned, reached a high point during the revolution, the Lebanese revolution. And tell us specifically what your organization has been doing to prevent online violence against women, and what your mandate is, and what you're doing both in Lebanon, but also regionally, if you're doing that.
Of course. Thank you again. أولاً النساء اللبنانيات وخاصة
First, the Lebanese women, and especially the activists, and especially during the first part of the Lebanese revolution, were very stood in solidarity with the victims of the online violence or the cyber violence and the gender violence, and the reactions against this type of violence, and especially that we were new to these tools that were used then. So these interventions of activists were limited to solidarity campaigns, and as the colleagues, the activists from the region mentioned, in Lebanon there was a surveillance or a tight control over the social media platforms and accounts of activists, and a lot of arrestations took place because of comments or posts that were put on social media. So women, in fact, as a form of solidarity, decided that whenever an activist was arrested, to to hold a sit-in in front or before the police stations where the activist was arrested, and then the reactions of female activists developed, especially after we knew the types of attacks we were victim of, whether attacks from government, the government, or the political parties, or from simple individuals. So after we launched solidarity campaigns on social media, and after revealing or talking about all types of violence that these women faced, and we developed this type of organization to have a very systematic work in order to find real solutions to violence. And in fact, during the revolution and even after the revolution, that is during COVID, when we were locked down, especially that the social platforms were the only tools for us to express our views, especially that we were kicked out of the public spaces and the squares. And we started really organizing our ways of organization of coordination in order to stop the all forms of violence, and especially the online violence against women. And one of the organizations who worked on this was our organization, Female. And we launched a campaign that was entitled "The Screen Can't Protect You," and the Female launched this campaign early 2020. And we studied this campaign, and this campaign studied and monitored all types of violence against women. And at the same time, we had testimonials from the victims or victims of cyber crimes, and the findings were posted on the social media and also on the traditional media. And after following this campaign, we had awareness raising videos on the types of violence and how women can protect themselves against violence. And as you know, Lebanon is one of the Arab countries that have a national has a hotline to report violence against women, or sorry, online violence or cyber violence. And in Female, we decided to receive these calls and direct them to the internal security forces that was receiving the calls and helping women who were victims of online or cyber violence. After that, we developed a toolkit on cyber safety, and that were used as training tools for to train women on the feminist perspective, and how we can really help women to work on these issues and express themselves. And this toolkit is available through our website in both English and Arabic. And since 2020, when we published or made this toolkit available, we organized around 100 trainings on cyber safety and security, and how women activists and women journalists can protect themselves of all types of violence, and also and particularly cyber violence. And we as organization, we followed this work in order to inform women about this emerging new type of violence that was not present before 2019. And I would like to repeat the idea that was already said, that in fact the technological revolution created new spaces to express ourselves and also to be able to organize ourselves. That is why it is vital that any efforts today, to exert efforts today about the importance of being present in these spaces and the importance of having safe spaces. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Thiwa, for that great explanation and for the incredible work that you're doing to respond to this. We really at Femena, we look forward to working with you more on these really important issues and addressing and making sure that our network of women human rights defenders and generally women human rights defenders in MENA region are safer in online spaces. Lama, I'm going to turn over to you now and ask you, in our online consultation, others discussed also some of the strategies they used in response to online violence. Are there any strategies that struck you that you would like to share here that people discussed?
Well, yeah, thank you, Suzanne, for asking me again. Well, I think I want to emphasize the importance of keep doing this, like keep speaking about this very important topic and keep having sessions and webinars and invite other women, feminist organizations and women human rights defenders to share their experiences, and at the same time keep educating the audience about this and about the different types of online violence we face, and that sometimes they can be engaged in online violence without they know that this is harassment or this is violence. And also I want to say that advocating advocating and pressuring corporates to be well engaged with the civil society and women human rights defenders and feminist movements to help initiate meaningful mechanisms. I mean, effective mechanisms to help women complain, to help women be protected, and help them combat the stigma and stereotyping that they might face after even speaking about anything. And also, it's very important to continuously analyze the differences between the different experiences and learn from other women movements. And also, I'm going to speak about the grassroots level and the government level, because it's also important to launch inter-community dialogues to also raise awareness about this, and at the same time speak to the governments about the importance of laws and the importance of protecting the civic space, and sometimes show solidarity with colleagues and other sisters and who are facing online violence, and raising awareness of such cases when it ended up, for example, in imprisonment or ended up in a very massive smear campaign. So I think those strategies, keep speaking about this, keep analyzing, learning, and keep educating others and advocating are the most effective strategies that we can use nowadays.
Thank you so much, Lama. I'm going to use this opportunity also because we're having a side conversation with some of our other team members, really picking up on some of the points that you've mentioned. We have at Femena, we have a new program and a new section to our website, which is called the Yara WHRD Center, and where we talk about holistic security. So it's about wellness, self-care, physical and organizational security, but then online security. And a lot of the discussion on online security is actually the violence that women human rights defenders and feminists are facing in online spaces and how they can address it, and really drawing on your experiences as well. I want to make sure that everyone who's listening also takes a look at our website and keeps that in mind and shares it as a resource. But we really look forward to working with all of the speakers in populating that information and making sure that we have sufficient information for other women human rights defenders about how they can be safe in online spaces. I'm going to go, I know we're running short of time, and I'm going to go to my last question. I'm going to ask everybody to just 1 or 2 points in terms of their asks from the international community or from social media platforms on how to keep women human rights defenders safe in online spaces. What do you want to see, either the international community, the UN or governments to do, or social media platforms to do to make sure that you're safe and that you're safe online, you and your colleagues are safe online? And I'm going to go again in the same order. I'll start with Julia. Do I see Julia? Oh, there you are, Julia. Yes. So if you have one or two asks, that would be great.
بعتقد فينا نكون عم نبدأ بالنسبة على مستوى المجتمع الدولي.
Well, as to the international community, I believe that it is about time, especially after these great advancements and the progress at the internet level, to have an international law to criminalize all this violence, online violence and the crimes. So I believe that this is one step. In addition, these organizations should also provide the support to the feminists and activists, the human rights activists, and especially those who are victims, who were victims of online crimes, and especially that a lot of women are usually excluded, especially after, or they exclude themselves of the online spaces, especially after they are a victim of violence online. We shouldn't also forget that decision makers in technology companies are usually men, and this and the educational organization that consider that these organizations are only men organizations, and women are not usually supported and encouraged to study or to enter these fields, I mean the online fields, and so that they in this space, online space, women also need more support and need to be encouraged in order to express their rights and express their views, and to be also decision makers in this field. I also believe that the platforms and these companies have a real obligation and responsibility. That is by following the international laws, especially that every company has its own policies and algorithms, and they can protect women from online violence. That is why we should lobby and make more pressure on these companies to develop their algorithms and policies to increase protection, to better protect women. And there are a lot of pages that included not only male discourse, but also hatred discourse, and I made a lot of reports on these pages, but their requests were unheeded. And I also read that on Facebook, a lot of violations against or violence against women are perpetrated, and Facebook is one of the slowest platforms to respond to these demands or to these complaints. So I believe that the companies also have a great responsibility to assume. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia. And as we discussed, we had a connection with Meta. We're going to reach out to them again and see if we can have a consultation with some activists from the region so that we can talk about how they can make sure that the space is safe. Azine?
I have three points. It would be very short. One is the technology companies should update their policy and the reporting mechanism, so it's useful for the non-English speakers as well to report their violence, online hate speech and violence. The second one is to keep the technology companies should continue the communication and dialogue with the civil society activists and civil society members. And the third one, for the international community, they should increase the resources, technical and non-technical resources, to for the civil society to able to provide access to the VPN to the Iranian people inside the country.
Thank you very much. And Sarah, what are your recommendations or your asks from the international community or from social media platforms about how to keep Tunisian women safe in online spaces?
شركات الاجتماع وخذك تكون أكثر استجابة أكثر في مسألة العنف المسلط على
Now we can hear the speaker, and I think she reached the third point related to the companies, the technology companies that need to update their policies to be able to protect women online.
And Giwa, we're ready to listen to your recommendations. What are your asks from the international community and from social media?
Well, for starters, أكيد السنة تم الإضاءة على موضوع
Today, or this year actually, the digital issue was highlighted in our organization, and I think that this is something we need. This has to be updated in different ways. The theme this year was digital innovation and technology for gender equality. And I think that through introducing the types of violence to the individuals, especially women who might be victims of violence in the region, this would be useful, because unfortunately we are illiterate in these topics. Sometimes we do not know what types of attacks that we might face. We do not know the programs or the softwares that might be sent to our devices, and sometimes we might be hacked without noticing. So that is why I think that the most important step that has to be taken today is awareness, and then awareness and more awareness against the seriousness of this topic, around the idea that cyber violence is one of the most dangerous types of violence, because in this type of violence there's no deterrent, since we are speaking about something that is protected by a screen. And second, as of course all the others said, we are today in a real need for an international law or an international or universal declaration that stipulates clearly the laws that the countries have to abide by in order to face cyber violence or digital violence. And third, I think that social media platforms like Meta and others and other companies, as Lama has highlighted before, must be more aware of the Arabic language and of diagnosing or being able to diagnose the violence against women activists on social media. I think that the meta algorithms in specific must be updated in order for them to identify the hatred speeches and the violent language used in comments that are considered violently against women and especially against the activists in the region. And I think that abiding by these 3 points as a start can be useful in order to transform our reality in the region. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Riwa. And last, I'm going to turn to you, Lama. You're pretty active also on social media. What is one of your main ask of international community or social media? You can talk about your own ask here. You don't have to necessarily, or you can reflect back to the discussions, whichever you feel comfortable with.
Well, yeah, I do. I actually don't want to say again because I agree with everything that have been said, but I actually want to speak about two specific things. The first one is for the international community to have like a more an active role in designing specific programs that can provide holistic security for women human rights defenders exposed to such cyber violence, which includes, for example, urgent support in cases of emergency threats or killing threats, and also help women human rights defenders who are suffering mentally because of the threats and because of the attacks. Because, for example, we know one case which happened, I think, less than 5 months ago with the Yemeni activist. She was, I forgot her name, but she was from Yemen, and she was a woman human rights defender, and she actually tried to commit suicide because of the smear campaign she was exposed to, but she didn't die. But this can, can show us the extent of, of the severity of the online violence. So this is one thing that I would like to ask the international community to help and support with. And the other thing is the space is opening, actually facilitating and opening the space to have regular dialogues with the government, and especially the governments, I mean, in Egypt, Syria, and other governments in the region. The governments that are using the laws to criminalize the work of human rights defenders, to criminalize the work and attack them. So we need to have like more, space of dialogue to discuss these cases and try to get, a protection mechanism from the international community and also from the government themselves.
Great. Thank you. Just so that, I think Lama was breaking up, but just so that, support for women human rights defenders who are being pressured, emergency support, but then also international and national dialogue and laws that prevent violence against women and criminalize violence against women online. I'm going to now turn to questions. I think there was one question already, and it was answered. It was about the work of Femena and their toolkit. But if there are other questions, and also if there's any sort of questions in the Whova platform, I ask Ida to transfer that here so that I can make sure to see it. Our team here is talking a lot about the discussions that you had, and thinking about how some of that is really your experiences are so useful and helpful for the rest of the region. So I also invite them to ask any questions that they may have. Oh, sorry, I didn't see your question, Lama Khatib. Thank you very much for your question. Lama asks, what alliances outside the feminist movement would be helpful to build or strengthen to elevate these asks? I think, before I turn it over to the speakers, I just want to say, Lama, thank you for asking that question. It's really important. We, along with our partner, Mian, we reached out to Meta and had a very helpful and useful conversation with Meta about the online harassment of women human rights defenders in the region. We want to reach out again to Meta. Fortunately, we have a link there, but we don't have direct links, I think, with many of these social media platforms at a high enough level to have them listen to us and to take measures, to protect women human rights defenders. So I think that's something that groups like yours can help facilitate, high-level access to social media platforms, in getting them on board to understand not only the kinds of violence that women human rights defenders, I mean, the women face in the region, but particularly the kinds of violence that women human rights defenders face, because very quickly that online smearing can transform into security threats against women human rights defenders in these contexts. A lot of times that online smearing is actually carried out by security forces. It's, you know, it seems like it's ordinary people, but it really is security forces, and it's intended to build a case against them as, you know, terrorists or people who are acting against national security. So online, you know, platforms need to understand the complexities of working in this environment. And not only do, you know, the online smearing can turn into security cases, but can also threaten their lives, as I think that Lama mentioned. But I'm going to ask others if they have comments in response to Lama's question. Julia or Azine. I know, Azine, you do a lot of advocacy in your organization.
I would just repeat your what you already said. Like the tech company can be really a strength at these, as you mentioned, like tech companies having the direct channels with these companies, and also other platforms like other companies should provide the platforms and safe platform to the women rights activists. In Iran, particularly, sometimes many of these women don't have access to many of the safe platforms for various reasons, and some of them is sometimes blocked from outside the country, from international companies, and providing the access, providing the services to the civil society can very helpful.
I think another issue that comes up when you talk about Iran, and I think Syria as well, is that these contexts are also sanctioned. So that prevents users sometimes from not only having access to social media, but also critical tools. Is this something that you found to be a barrier also, Julia, in your context? You can answer Lama's question, of course, you can answer that, but I also asked in places like Syria and Iran, we also have sanctions that prevent access for women, for ordinary users, but also for women human rights defenders. And, you know, if you had that experience in Syria.
صحيح. بداية يعني إذا بدنا نحكي على منصات التواصل.
First, if you want to speak about the social media platforms before the revolution in Syria in 2011, those platforms like Facebook and others were banned. So we had no access to these platforms except through a proxy. And when the revolution started and the female and male activists started relying on platforms to coordinate, to call for demonstrations, the Syrian regime opened or allowed the use of Facebook and other platforms in order to be able to control these activists, and in order to be able to know what these activists are saying or are doing. And in most cases, in Syria and in other countries, there is a kind of agreement between the governments and the technology companies. They either sell information or give them information about activists and others. So as we said before, it is an evil that we cannot avoid, if we may say this expression. As to the first question asked by Lama concerning the assistance that might be received by external partners other than the feminist movements in order to have a safer space for women on the internet, I think that this is an accumulation of efforts. These are complementary efforts. When we speak about, for instance, organizations or rights-based organizations, those that provide the legal consultations, any types of interventions related to awareness on the legal aspects or how to raise complaints or training the staff working on these topics is, of course, something helpful and useful. When we speak about educational organizations, anything that can be provided through educational programs, through courses provided to students on safety and how to protect themselves and against cybercrime, bullying, etc. This is, of course, useful. So efforts from one party is not enough. The efforts are accumulating efforts, and joining these efforts based on, of course, the experience of every party is very critical. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have a question from Elaine. Thank you, Elaine. And she asks, what are the mechanisms for outing individuals, bots, or organizations that attack women online? And I thought maybe, you know, Ghiwa, since your organization works so much on this issue, perhaps you would be a good person to answer this question and perhaps even
Yes, sure. أولاً بعتقد أنه البروسيس of outing المتحرشين أو المتعدين أو المعنفين على
First of all, the process of outing of those people on social media could be dangerous if you are dealing with it as individuals, because we will have backflashes that are really violent. And this is something that we have to take into account. So we must either have a specialized entity in reporting, and we have a lot of organizations in our region that are helping in this part, similar to what Femena has done previously. There are local organizations in Lebanon that are trying to provide a proper reporting mechanism in order not to give the space to these people, or at least not to provide them with the spaces on social media platforms. But unfortunately, because of the algorithms that are weak, because of the lack of resources when it comes to the Arabic language, the reporting mechanisms of such people is a little bit outdated or not really clear. For this reason, we have relied previously on the solidarity campaigns for outing such people, whereby the survivor of a violence is not the one that should be facing this, in order to avoid backlashes from other individuals or from the criminals of violence. And we in Female, we have relied on Twitter mainly in order to be able, as an organization, and not as individuals, to be able to put an end to what these people do, and in order to put an end to their attacks, or in order not to make these attacks be repeated with other individuals. So that is why I think solidarity is the best or most effective way currently in order to overcome this thing. And here comes another answer for the first question. Yes, of course, all human rights defenders, all those who work in non-governmental organizations or female and male activists can be helpful in this frame. We might not have the complete mechanisms, yes, but we have the word of mouth, and we also have our capacity to support these individuals in order for them not to feel that they are alone in this crisis. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I wonder if Sarah, if you have any comments for either of those two questions.
She says, I will try to answer. Of course, cyber violence is not only against women activists. Uh, it is something that all the civil society activists have to take into account, because if today violence is against women, tomorrow it could be against all the male and female activists. And this is what is taking place in Tunisia. It is not only limited to female activists.
What I'd like to see is something, similar to the Human Rights Defenders Resolution, the Women Human Rights Defenders Resolution from the UN, that includes, that either specifically talks about online harassment and how that's happening, how it's impacting women human rights defenders, but what the responsibility of governments are, and also what the responsibility of the private sector is. And I think it's critical for us, as I mentioned before, is to have access to social media platforms to make sure not only that they understand the types of violence that specifically human rights defenders, but specifically women human rights defenders, because they face greater levels of violence because of their gender, and LGBT communities as well, they face greater violence because of their gender, so that they understand that and they can take measures to protect them better, but that they adjust algorithms and they have people on staff who understand the language, who understand the culture. So it's not, when you do a report, it's not, they don't just look at it and say, oh no, this is not targeting. I'll give you one example for us. When Clubhouse started, a lot of Iranians went onto Clubhouse. They're still pretty active on Clubhouse, but it happened to coincide with the Me Too movement in Iran. And a number of us women human rights defenders had talked about the men, many of them well-known men, artists or intellectuals who had been outed by women for the violence that they perpetuated against women. And we were targeted in multiple spaces on social media, but particularly on Clubhouse. There was a group, and it was really rather disturbing, because not only did they hold sessions where they would slander us, with thousands of people in those sessions, but those sessions also started to take a very securitized approach, that they seemed very clear that they were also building security cases against us, so that it seemed to us that it was very much tied to security forces, whether that was intentional or not. And we reached out to a lot of people at Clubhouse, but got no response, and mostly because Clubhouse was new, and these people who were slandering us had a lot of followers, and they didn't want to suspend their accounts. Now, these particular people, their accounts have been suspended multiple times, thankfully, since then, but it was extremely frustrating that that in the process of reporting was extremely, extremely complicated. And the response, it was much less than, it was nothing really. We didn't get much of a response at all. So I think Julia had a question or a comment, right? Julia, did you have a comment?
It's fine. My mistake.
Clubhouse, Clubhouse. I don't know if you're on Clubhouse or not.
No, unfortunately, but we heard that I speak in Arabic because ببداية انتشار الكلوب هاوس صار في فعلا هجمات حقيقية على الناشطات بالسوريات، وحتى صار ينعمل جلسات خاصة للتهجم على الناشطات السوريات، وكانت تجمع عدد كبير من الأشخاص يلي هن معنفين أو مناهضين لهذا العمل يلي عم تقوم فيه. بقدر افهم يلي عم بيصير مع الناشطات بإيران، وللأسف
So I can understand what's happening with the female activists in Iran, and it is very unfortunate. However, this requires more action from our side and from all those who support women at this level.
Thank you. I think with that response, and I think everyone's commitment to continued solidarity across our countries in the region, I'm going to close that session. I think we'll create, Femena is committed to creating more spaces where this discussion can happen. We'll reflect a lot of these experiences, as I mentioned, on our Yara WHRD Center. We'll be holding trainings and seminars to discuss, specifically what's happening in the MENA region, and hopefully we'll be able to reach out, not only to Meta, but to other social media platforms, pulling together members of our community so they can talk directly to decision makers in these companies and in these social platforms, and talk about how they can take steps to better protect women human rights defenders. And certainly we have a good relationship with the special rapporteurs within the UN system, the special procedures, and we'll continue this discussion with them as well. I'm very happy that CSW has decided to highlight this very important issue. There's also a conference coming up, the RightsCon conference, I think it's in July, that's again focused on human rights, the intersection of human rights and technology. This time I think it's focused more on bodily rights, protecting bodily rights, and technology, how technology can contribute to that. But please, follow them as well. We had a similar session to this one last year as part of the RightsCon conference, but we're committed to continuing this discussion because we recognize that online spaces are absolutely critical to feminist movements in the MENA region, to women human rights defenders across the MENA region, LGBT activists across the region who are facing increased authoritarianism and limited civic space. I want to also thank all of our speakers, and especially thank our excellent interpreters, Jocelyn and Christine, who are always with us and who make our communication possible. And I want to thank our team at Femena for organizing this great event, Lama, Ida, everyone else who contributed. But thank you very much. Let's continue the conversation, and we look forward to solidarity actions with you.